I'm Doug Ross, editorial page editor at the Times. Here with us today for this endorsement interview is Karl Tatgenhorst, Libertarian candidate for Secretary of State. Also in the room is Bob Heiss, editor, and Brian Vernellis behind the other side of the lens. Let's talk about the big issue that is facing everyone in Indiana, and that's jobs. So as Secretary of State, you do business registrations and things like that. What would you do that might help the economy?
Well, one of the things that I'm starting to do in my campaign is talking to business owners themselves about how we often wait to see what the government is going to do about the economy, but as business owners, we have budgets, and we have operational goals, and we have staff, and we could be structuring our deals in such a way where they're more strategic than tactical, and in doing that, we can be ensuring that we're putting out a reasonable amount of predictable money into the local economy to businesses we deal with, and at the same time we're receiving business in a predictable manner. Where we're perhaps selling services as a subscription instead of an hourly rate. Things of that nature allow us to build a more predictable revenue stream, and when the revenue stream is more predictable for businesses can better invest and actually move capital projects along, make hiring decisions. But when they're going kind of hand to mouth, they have to worry. There's a lot more risk. So by building more predictable revenue streams, they can actually affect a lot more change in the economy without waiting to see what the government's going to do.
Okay. Can you give specifics of how the Secretary of State would help with that?
Well, the Secretary of State, I'm actually using the campaign as a platform for the education around that, but one of the things the Secretary of State can do is advocate for more scrutiny over the whole licensure process. We tend to get carried away with licensing too many things, and if you look at some of the licensing boards, we spend an awful lot of money to make sure that we are safely licensed to get our haircut and a lot of other things. And so the Secretary of State, I think, should exert a lot of scrutiny over that process and advocate for actually less licensure and more freedom within the market.
Okay. Although that has to go to the legislature.
Right, exactly. That's what I meant by stating that they should advocate for it. I don't believe that any executive office should try to rule by executive order, although the Secretary of State isn't even capable of doing that. But we have a legislature for a reason, and the Secretary of State's office is a good podium to be able to access those people.
Okay.
Tell us about yourself and what brought you to this race. Give us a little bit of background.
Well, I was raised here in the region, grew up in Chesterton, and I served in the Army from 90 to 94, and that was where I really nurtured a good, healthy, I think, patriotic attitude. You take an oath to the Constitution, and you're always in front of the flag, and you're serving your country. But as a young man, you don't always know what all of that means. And as I grew older, voting, my voting habits tended to go from party to party because I wasn't quite happy with what I was seeing. I believe that we need a lot of business and regulatory freedoms, but at the same time, I believe that people need to be free to live their lives. So you hear that both of those two things are catchphrases for two of our major political parties. So I went back and forth and found that I wasn't getting enough of either from either party. And around 2011, I started meeting some libertarians because I had looked into that, because in Indiana we're fortunate to have that on the ballot. So I met Rupert Bonham, I met Andrew Horning, and I met a lot of local candidates as well. And I started to read more about the libertarian philosophy, and helped to re-affiliate the Porter County Libertarian Party, and ultimately ended up running for office.
And the Secretary of State's office is important to the Libertarians. Of course, do you want to explain?
Well, it has a dual importance. I'm actually running for it personally because I believe the office is very important. I believe that voter suffrage is probably one of our most important issues. We need to make sure that people have access to the ballots, but also from the standpoint of the party, logistically, Secretary of State's race determines whether or not you make the ballot. We need to hit a 2% threshold to get ballot access and a 10% threshold to get major party access. I believe Mike Wary in the 2010 election ran around 6.5%, and we are. I'm hoping to win the race, but I think the people who are also in the party are hoping to just crack the 10% threshold with this race.
Okay. Have the Libertarians ever done that in Indiana? Did you know of?
We have not cracked the 10% on a statewide race.
Okay.
I believe that we have on a few local races, and we do actually have a couple elected Libertarians in Indiana in local politics.
Okay.
What type of campaign can you run? I mean, you're going to go, are you door to door? Do you have advertising?
There's door to door. I'm getting ready to start some advertising. We don't have as wide a donor base as the two established parties or the major parties. We are established. We've been since 1994. We've had ballot access in Indiana, but the major parties. They can make more at a fundraising event than I'll raise in the entire campaign. So it's relying a lot on door-to-door, a lot on volunteers. I've been to, I would say, around 8 county fairs in the last couple months. So a lot of travel. Do the
Libertarians have volunteers across the state who will be helping you, and in an organized way?
We do, yes. Yeah, I have a volunteer coordinator. His name is Mike Sandridge, and he's coordinating that.
Okay. In terms of you talked about voting as one of the major things that the Secretary of State's office does. Of course, we know the Republican who was initially elected to this 4 years ago, Charlie White, booted from office because of vote fraud.
Right.
So you're watching the voter laws pretty carefully, I would imagine.
I think every candidate is. I think that's fair to say. I don't know all of the details about how Charlie White came to have that conviction. I do know that since then, Connie Lawson has stepped in and stepped up actually fairly well as Secretary of State. So she's nonetheless a very respectable opponent. But yeah, we will be watching those laws. Some of the things we're watching in particular are vote centers. As a Libertarian, part of me is very fond of the vote center idea. When we look at it, there's around 23 counties in Indiana that are implementing it, and they're stating that their average savings per election is $40,000. One of the things that we are looking at very closely too, though, is the amount of access prior to that for the people, because what happens is they consolidate from 30 or 40 voting precincts down to around 10 vote centers, and so and in the trade-off, the voter gets to go to any one of those 10 centers instead of being locked into, I have to be at a specific place, which we think sounds pretty good, but we want to make sure that people who are unable to get there are accounted for and helped. And so far, most of the county clerks that I've talked to have pretty good plans in place for that. So I think that I think that that's actually a good move. I mean, we're gonna save money for the state, and at the same time, we're gonna make voting more convenient. So we're watching it close, but I think it's a good thing.
You talked about voter suffrage as probably one of our most important issues, I think, or the words you used.
Well, in addition to voter suffrage, I think that voter education is of critical importance. Unfortunately, that's not something that the government can or should do. I don't want to hear about public education on how you should vote. That's probably not a good thing. And I think all of my opponents would probably agree with that. But we need to be,
who you should vote for.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good.
We need to be able to vote, and we need to be aware. And I like that you have such an open format, and you have an interview so everybody can see. We need to be aware of what all of these different candidates are saying, and the ones who are incumbent. Look at what they say versus what they've done. Do the two match? If the two don't match, maybe you should vote on how they've behaved. And that's not to say anything about any particular candidate. I'm talking from the top of your ballot all the way to the bottom of your ballot.
Okay. What makes you, in your view at least, the better candidate in this race?
I think that both of my opponents have specific advantages for specific groups of people. Libertarians, though, we often advocate for liberties that we don't even personally agree with. I think that we are actually the better choice as a party to manage the elections, because of the fact that we don't care which group we can help in terms of voting access. We want to make sure everyone has that right to vote. And if we don't get elected, we aren't going to complain that that's an election issue, unless of course it actually is. But we figure that if the people cast a fair and accurate vote and we're not elected, that's simply how it goes. And I believe that that's the right party to put in the Secretary of State's office.
Do you have any particular reforms, changes you'd like to make?
There are not currently any major reforms that I want to make. Like I said, I do want to advocate for less licensure. I think that Indiana has a pretty good electoral system. If you look, the states on either side of us, third-party candidates, independent candidates, they're routinely getting sued, taken off the ballot for all sorts of frivolous reasons. We have a specific hoop that we have to jump through as a party. We don't believe that people should have to jump through that hoop, and we don't particularly like it. But we jump through that hoop, and administratively we are given all of the access that we're supposed to. So I don't believe that there's major reform to the elections process that I'm currently pursuing.
Okay.
Well, what can you do about I mean, we talked a little bit about voting, and the participation was at its lowest in the primary. I think it was 13%. In Porter, it was 11%, if I remember that right. How are voting centers? That seems to be more of a challenge for a voter to.
I don't think that voting centers will increase it, and I kind of answered your last question a little wrong. I have, within my platform, there are specific issues that I have, but I don't see them as reform. There are changes that I want to make, but I've never thought about them in terms of the word reform, and that is a little bit the correct description of it. So to backtrack just a little bit, one of the things I believe alienates so many people is a lot of people do fail to get satisfied by either party. And I tell people on the campaign trail that one of our most frivolous choices in life is what chocolate do we want to have. And if we go to Walmart, there are 2,000 selections. One of our most important choices is who's going to be running our county government. Our local government is the most important to us, and we get two choices. I think that ballot access should be if you meet the constitutional requirements set forth in the U.S. Constitution and the Indiana State Constitution, you should be able to offer your choice to the voters. And the voters, that comes back to voter education. They need to be paying attention to who's running to be able to make a good choice. So that, I also think that people are put off by the fact that they don't get to vote on issues very often. I believe that we should be spending more time with referendum votes, recall election, which in my mind is actually just a form of referendum, because the voters don't actually vote someone out of office. They vote for the legislature to take action, which is no different in my mind than a referendum. So I think that things like that, where you increase the amount of choice that the voters have and the amount of impact that the voters have, I think will increase participation.
Okay, so Indiana doesn't have the ballot initiatives.
We do not.
California
The only initiative that we do have is specifically referendum. The state can and does indeed pass laws sometimes that are not mandated to the counties, and then the counties have the option of either the county council will put them on, or the counties can place them on the ballot for a referendum issue.
Any examples of that happening?
Well, a lot of times it happens with county taxes for schools. I think Porter County did a referendum for an additional tax for their school systems in either 2012 or 2010. So those get used, but but referendum is literally, that's just the state says that this should be a law. Do you think it should? Yes or no? And I think that people actually show up based on that issue. There are people that really, they went to the ballot box just because they wanted to vote on that issue. So when we put issues on the ballot, we encourage participation.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, that is something I hadn't thought about. The issue voting could be the answer to more participation, which is interesting.
Thank you.
Is there something we didn't ask that we should have?
You know, I wanted to talk about ballot access, and you gave me the opportunity. I wanted to talk about, I think the businesses really should focus on driving the economy rather than being a passenger. The government can do a lot to make changes to the economy, but also in running our business frugally. If we find ways in a $10 million business to save $200,000 a year, that's either $200,000 that we can be investing to cover operating expenses on a rainy day, or to build up the business. So we can drive the economy pretty much ourselves.
Will you appear to get together with your opponents anywhere in the campaign?
There isn't anything scheduled. I would be happy to do so, though.
All righty. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you for viewing.